Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ingarani me Piripini te whakapaparanga mai. Ko Leicester me Bristol te whenua tupu. Ko Tamaki Makoro te kāinga, he Industry Research Liaison Manager o New Zealand Food Safety Science and Research Centre. Ko Kaila Ata toku ingoa. Tēnā koutou katoa. On behalf of the New Zealand Food Safety Science and Research Centre, I'd like to welcome you all to the May edition of the Food Science Seminar Spotlight of 2023. Firstly, I'd like to remind you all to register for our annual symposium, which is happening on the 3rd of July. So that's less than 5 weeks away. We've worked really hard on the programme to bring you some really interesting and relevant sessions. And this is running in partnership with NZFSSRC. Their early bird registrations close at the end of the day tomorrow. So if you do want a discounted rate for their conference as well, please register for both events soon. The registrations will close 2 weeks beforehand on the 23rd of June, so don't leave it to the last minute. So to set the context for today's seminar, the World Health Organization published the first global report on cell-based food safety in April. Our chief scientist, distinguished Professor Phil Bramer from the University of Otago, was interviewed on Radio New Zealand about this at the time. You can listen to the interview again through the link on our website news page. So today I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Caroline Hiesener. She is a postdoctoral fellow in Food Experience and Sensory Technology, Sensory Testing Lab, FEAST, within the School of Food and Advanced Technology at Massey University. She is an academic researcher who specialises in nutrition science and more recently is also working in the field of sensory and consumer science. This year with her team, she published a paper in February around New Zealand attitudes and perceptions towards cell-based or cultivated meat. So as always, if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom window. We'll take questions at the end and Phil Bramer, our chief scientist, will be joining us for the Q&A session in case there are any wider questions around cell-based foods. So without any further ado, Caroline, if you'd like to take it away, please.
Thank you so much for the introduction. All right. We just practiced there and then it was here and
it's always the way, isn't it?
And now the PowerPoint thingy is not coming up. Is that showing?
Yes, there we go.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And you can see the presentation?
Oh, we can see the whole slideshow. There we go.
Is that better?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
apologies
great.
for that.
All
right. Yeah, so thanks so much for the introduction. So as Kyla said, my name is Caroline Hiesener and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at FEAST. And I'm going to talk about perceptions of cultivated meat in flexitarians resident in Aotearoa. So if you've been to the supermarket recently, you would have noticed that there's an increasing availability of plant-based meat alternatives available. They come in many different product kinds, shapes, sizes, and categories. And even though the availability is steadily increasing and the sales are growing rapidly, the percentage of plant-based meat alternative sales as a part of the total meat industry is still only 1.4%. So what is holding consumers back to purchase these plant-based meat alternatives? Well, a marketing report from 2019 suggests that 60% of consumers who are already trying to reduce their meat intake actively finds the inferior taste of plant-based meat alternatives the main barrier for consumption. So what do consumers want? We conducted a large consumer study last month in which 140 consumers came to our laboratory, and they tasted 21 different plant-based meat alternatives. And each of these products was rated by the consumers for meat likeness, so how much the sample resembled meat according to them. You can see in the green box, the first 9 products are evaluated to not be meat-like, but the 12 products in the purple box, the consumers thought did resemble meat at least somewhat. So if we look at the 3 products that are evaluated to be most like meat-like, that was the Let's Eat Burger Patty, the Plant Burger Patty, and the Burkano Burger Patty. And then all of these samples were evaluated for overall liking as well. And so again, you see that division between products that did not imitate meat in green, and they were generally liked less than the products that did imitate meat in purple. And what was remarkable is that the products that were liked most were identical to the products that were evaluated to be most meat-like. So I have some statistical analysis left to do, but this might suggest that consumers like plant-based meat alternatives with a meat-like sensory profile. But today I'm talking about cultivated meat, or lab-grown meat, cultured meat, clean meat, Franken meat, as it's also called. And cultivated meat is made by taking stem cells from an animal, which are then put in a large bio reactor with growth medium, where the cells are grown and replicated, and they are then harvested and scaffolded into the final product. So that could be like a beef burger patty. And if we look at this infographic that depicts dairy and meat alternatives, you can see that the meat alternatives are divided up in traditional meat substitutes that include tofu or seitan, and plant-based analogs that include products that closely imitate meat, such as the Beyond or the Impossible Burger. And then there's cultivated meat. And so the cultivated meat is different from the traditional meat substitutes and the plant-based meat analogs because these products are made from plants, whereas cultivated meat is made from animal cells. So just to give you a little bit of context where cultivated meat is sitting in the scheme of meat alternatives. Okay, so currently cultivated meat is not commercially available, and no sensory tests have been run to evaluate what the taste of cultivated meat is like in comparison to conventional meat. Back in January 2022, a food reporter called Michael Ensky did have the opportunity to blind taste a cultured or cultivated chicken sample next to a conventional chicken sample, and she reported that she could taste some differences, as she could distinguish the 2 samples, but she could not pick which one was the cultivated sample and which one was the conventional sample. So this suggests that this sounds promising in terms of cultivated meat being a meat alternative that has that meat-like sensory profile. And academics as well as developers have said that once or if cultivated meat is fully developed, cultivated meat could be an alternative to conventional meat with an identical sensory profile that might be more appealing to consumers than those current plant-based meat alternatives. However, like I said, cultivated meat is not yet available, and if you follow the news on cultivated meat, the news reports that come out can be quite contradicting. So there's reports coming out saying lab-grown meat could be on store shelves by 2022. The Australian-New Zealand framework accepted to regulate cultivated meat and precision fermentation, but then on the other side, it says that lab-grown meat is supposed to be inevitable. The science tells a different story, and last month that large life cycle analysis came out that reported that lab-grown meat's carbon footprint potentially is worse than that of retail beef. So there's a lot still out in the open, and I just wanted to highlight as well that launch dates of startups that do produce cultivated meat keeps on being pushed forward. So you can see that depicted, the launch dates depicted for 5 different cultivated meat startups, and you see that the launch dates have been pushed forwards at least once for most of them. A few were supposed to come out with a product in December 2022, but it hasn't happened. So yeah, a little bit unsure as to when we are going to be able to actually have buy this instead of our usual beef burger. But what we do know is that the market success of cultivated meat will highly depend on the consumer acceptance, and that is what I'll be talking about today. So perceptions of cultivated meat vary per country. There's a study that came out in 2019 measuring willingness to purchase of cultivated meat, and they found that in the US, consumers were relatively unwilling to purchase cultivated meat, whereas, for example, in China and India, there was a large proportion of respondents that was very willing to purchase cultivated meat. And if we look at Aotearoa, New Zealand, a study came out last year that reported that about 50% of their respondents was willing to purchase cultivated meat. However, this study had a relatively low number of respondents, 254, and they mostly were university staff and students, so not necessarily representative of the general New Zealand population. And today I'm going to be talking about an online survey that we conducted in 2021. The survey was completed by 572 flexitarians resident in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the flexitarians were defined by a meat consumption of less than 7 days a week. So in all of the respondents, we measured characteristics, and that included their age and their gender. We asked them to complete a food neophobia skill, and that is a measure of how willing someone is to try new foods. We asked them about their plant-based meat alternative and their meat consumption. And we asked them about their awareness of cultivated meat, and we used these different respondent characteristics to see whether they affected their potential engagement with cultivated meat, as well as their perceived product attributes of cultivated meat compared to conventional meat. And I will talk through these as I go. So in terms of demographics, of the respondents who completed the survey, there was a relatively equal number of men compared to women who completed the survey, and we had two age groups completing the survey. So 56% was millennials aged between 25 and 40, whereas 44% was aged between 41 and 55, and they belonged to Generation X. And then we divided the participants in 3 different groups with low, medium, or high neophobia based on their scores. We had 3 different meat consumer groups. So about a third that consumed meat less than 1 day a week, about a third that consumed meat 1 to 3 days a week, and then slightly more that consumed meat 4 to 6 days. And then there was 4 different groups of plant-based meat alternative consumers in terms of frequency, and that those groups ranged from consuming these alternatives, like they had only tried them once, or they between tried once, sorry, up to consuming these products 4 to 7 days a week. So the first statement that we asked our respondents about was, "I am aware of cultivated meat," and we asked the respondents to rate that statement on a 7-point scale that ranged between strongly disagree and strongly agree. And what we found is that 52% of the respondents was aware of cultivated meat, whereas 48% was not, indicated by their score. So if they were somewhat agreed, or strongly agreed, they were aware, and if they had a lower score, they were not. And if we look at the different participant characteristics, we found that the awareness was higher in millennials compared to Generation X, awareness was higher in men compared to women, and awareness was higher for the people that consumed plant-based meat alternatives often, so 4 to 7 days a week. So I don't expect you to read this, but this is just to say that all of the respondents received some information after that awareness question, just to ensure that everyone completed the remaining survey with the same baseline knowledge. And so then there was 3 questions that measured potential engagement with cultivated meat. And these questions or statements were, I would be willing to taste cultivated meat. I would be willing to eat cultivated meat on a regular basis. And I would be willing to purchase cultivated meat instead of conventional meat if it was available, assuming an identical price. And again, we use that same scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we found that 67% of the respondents was willing to try cultivated meat, but the potential engagement dropped as the commitment increased. So willingness to eat, only 47% of the consumers was willing to eat cultivated meat regularly, and then 30% of the respondents was willing to purchase cultivated meat. And then if we look at, again, at those participant characteristics, we found that awareness of cultivated meat consistently increased the potential engagement, so the willingness to try, eat, and purchase cultivated meat. And then men compared to women and regular plant-based meat alternative consumers also increased the willingness to eat cultivated meat regularly and the willingness to purchase cultivated meat instead of conventional meat. So then we were interested in how the respondents perceived cultivated meat compared to conventional meat. So we included a statement that said, compared to conventional meat, I think cultivated meat would be, and then they rated each of these product attributes for agreement. So would be tastier, healthier, more animal friendly, more environmentally sustainable, safer, more ethical, and more natural. Again, that same agreement scale was used. And then if we graph those responses, there's a 7-point scale on the y-axis with the neutral point of neither agree or disagree marked with a dotted line. And so we can see that most of the product attributes, so tastier, healthier, safer, and more natural, are rated around that neutral mark. However, the respondents generally agreed that compared to conventional meat, they thought that cultivated meat would be more animal friendly, more environmentally sustainable, and more ethical. And that suggests that these could be the driving factors for consumption of cultivated meat in the future. So again, some of these participant characteristics affected the scores. I'm going to go through a couple now, just to highlight some interesting points. So if we specifically look at perceived tastiness of cultivated meat compared to conventional meat, we found that those who are aware of cultivated meat thought that cultivated meat would be more tasty than those who are not aware. Men perceived cultivated meat to be more tasty than women. Low meat consumers perceived cultivated meat to be more tasty than high meat consumers, and those who are frequent plant-based meat alternative consumers perceived cultivated meat to be more tasty than those who consume plant-based meat alternative less frequently. Interestingly, we found that low neophobic, so those who are generally open to try new foods, perceive cultivated meat to be less tasty than medium or high neophobics. And this is interesting because usually we expect that those who are open to try new foods also have more positive perceptions of new products, such as cultivated meat. So I had a little bit of a look into the literature, and I did find that low neophobics generally prefer whole foods or unprocessed products compared to medium or high neophobics, and therefore it might be that the unnatural way that cultivated meat is produced in is more off-putting to the low neophobic group compared to the medium or high neophobic group, who generally consume a lot more processed food anyways. So then we looked at environmental sustainability as well. So here we only found effects of awareness and neophobia, where aware respondents thought that cultivated meat would be more environmental sustainable than non-aware respondents. And here, low neophobics think that cultivated meat is more environmentally sustainable than those who are medium or highly neophobic. So there seems to be a lot of agreement amongst the participants that for perceived environmental sustainability compared to tastiness, for example. And in terms of safety, we did find effects of awareness for gender and effects of regular plant-based meat alternative consumption, but not for age, meat consumption, or neophobia. So we were able to do some segmentation of the consumers based on their perception of cultivated meat, and we found that most of the respondents had neutral perceptions of cultivated meat. So not necessarily being overly positive or negative about cultivated meat. 41% belonged to a positive segment, so they were characterized by generally positive attitudes towards cultivated meat, and only 9% belonged to a negative segment that had very negative perceptions of cultivated meat. And if we look at the characteristics of the participant within each of these segments, we found that the positive segment had relatively more millennials and less Generation X respondents than the other two clusters. If we look at meat consumption groups, we found that the positive cluster relatively had a low number of high meat consumers, whereas the neutral cluster or segment had a high number of high meat consumers. And oppositely, when we look at plant-based meat alternative consumption, we found that the positive segment had high numbers of high plant-based meat alternative consumers, whereas the neutral cluster had relatively low numbers of plant-based high plant-based meat alternative consumers. So again, this sort of highlights that plant-based meat alternative consumption might be quite strongly associated with how people perceive cultivated meat. So there's some limitations of this study that I need to talk about probably. So in this study, we did not consider education level, but it has previously been reported that those who are highly educated generally have more positive perceptions and attitude towards cultivated meat. We need to acknowledge that it's cognitively challenging to answer questions about a product concept without anyone having any tangible experience about the concept. And also future research should include vegans and vegetarians to be further investigated to see whether they would be willing to consume cultivated meat and how they perceive those products. So in summary, we found that cultivated meat is perceived to contribute to environmental sustainability, to ethics, and to increased animal welfare. We found that awareness most consistently improved the perceptions of cultured meat. We found that flexitarians do not have homogeneous perceptions or attitudes of cultivated meat, indicated by those 3 different consumer segments that we found. And based on our study, we found that those who consume plant-based meat alternatives already might be most likely to adopt cultivated meat in the future, or be willing to engage with cultivated meat. And there should be one more slide. So yeah, this is the paper that we published earlier this year. It was printed in Sustainability. There might be a link going out or something. We can get that to you. And then I would like to thank all of our industry partners of the Future Foods Catalyst project, who are listed on the top, and our funders who are listed on the left in purple. And thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Caroline. That was really interesting to hear, and you know, interesting to see the generational divide. I've got one question at the moment in the Q&A. Michael, could you also bring up Phil for the Q&A session as well, please? Thank you. So I've got a question here, which was the percentage whole food consumption measured in the group under investigation?
No, we only, in terms of diet, we only asked about their meat and their plant-based meat alternative consumption. So no, unfortunately not.
Okay, great, thank you. So Phil, I've got a question. So for those of you that haven't read the report from the WHO, what's the high level summary, and kind of what is the problem with these foods from a safety point of view?
Well, I guess the high level summary is that at this stage we don't know enough about how these lab-based meats will be produced to really understand the food safety risks. But I guess the sort of list that the experts put together based on how they assume they would be made covered risks which should be able to be managed, but there definitely are additional risks there that we don't get with conventional production.
Okay, great. I also had another question for Caroline. So did you ask any more kind of probing questions around the perceptions of safety of the cultivated meats? Like, do you know what types of safety concerns the participants had?
So we didn't look into it any further, but there's some other people that have. Safety, people associate unnaturalness and disgust with safety. So when people think that something is unnatural, they think it's disgusting, or they don't think it's appealing, and that will lead to reduced perceptions of safety. And I think that's the tricky thing with the cultivated meat, that a lot of people do not think that this will be like this is a natural way of producing meat, and then therefore that might lead to increased perceptions of unsafety, even though that might not necessarily, well, might be justified, might not be, I don't know, I'm no expert in that, but yeah, there's definitely some literature around that, but unfortunately we did not, we just looked at the global I guess perception. We didn't specify on safety or any other of the attributes in this study.
Thank you. I've got another question here. Thanks for the interesting presentation. I found ethical is a bit ambiguous to me personally. For example, I may include animal welfare into ethical. Did you define what ethical refers to in this study?
No, we did not define it, but yeah, I do agree. Probably environmental sustainability and animal welfare fall under the tree of ethics. But I think what is interesting is that those 3, so ethics, animal welfare, and environmental sustainability, were, if anything, motivators to, well, we don't know about motivators, but they were rated to be higher in cultivated meat compared to conventional meat. So suggesting that those might be the reasons that people are going to choose cultivated meat. Yeah,
Great.
rather than for example like health or taste. So like I think plant-based meat alternatives are often chosen, for example, for reasons of health, but it didn't, from our survey, it doesn't seem that health will be a particular driver. So that might be some differences of motivators between those different product categories.
Great, thanks. And on a similar question, how was safety defined as part of that?
So we didn't define it. So it was more, what people think is included in safety. And so, I do acknowledge that that might not have been the same for all of the respondents.
Okay, great. So this might be one for Phil. I don't know if you all know the answer to this, Caroline. But does the media for cultivating meat contain animal product components? And would the knowledge of this affect acceptance? And also the same with antimicrobials.
So for our survey, we told the respondents to assume that there was no animal products involved in the production of the cultivated meat, apart from the initial cells. But yes, I think it's a common challenge still. The major challenge that growth medium is made from bovine serum, and that that is not very animal friendly to harvest that. So, what was the question specifically?
Sorry, I've just
So like I guess yeah. So I don't think it's very viable as long as we need bovine serum to upscale cultivated meat. So I guess, does it contain? Well, it's not commercially available, so I don't know whether it does contain it necessarily. Yeah. But at the moment, it's challenging to produce it without it.
Yeah. Phil, do you know much more on this? Or I mean, just kind of as a general rather than specifically?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because obviously it's not going to be a meat-free product because it's made from meat cells, right? So, so it becomes a animal welfare issue, whether animals, and a sustainability issue. So for animal welfare issues, if you're harvesting animals to get the bovine serum albumin out, then you could argue that animals are harmed in the process. Presumably there'll be genetically ways to develop this product using genetic modification techniques and express it in cell culture. But it's all around cost and ability, I guess. The other area where animal components could be used in the scaffolding, you need, in order to get the texture and the structure, you might need to grow these cells on some sort of scaffold, which could be a protein-based scaffold. So it could be either a dairy protein or a meat protein, or it could be a polysaccharide type scaffold, or made of some other plant-based material. But then you're getting a meat-like product that contains other components in it, which could also be confusing to consumers.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think messaging is going to be interesting, and there's some studies on that as well, where they look at products perception based on the terminology, like for cultivated meat. So there's so many names that are circulating at the moment, and I think based on how it's marketed and how it's put into the market, consumers.
One of the concerns, something that has to be watched very carefully if labeling, is the allergens. If you're putting in plant proteins or soy proteins or whey proteins into a meat-like product, people may not expect that. So it's kind of an interesting field, very challenging, I think.
Yeah. I've got a couple more questions. So someone's asked, are there any challenges in the production processes of cultivated meat, so such as ingredients availability or supply chain issues?
I don't know about the availability of ingredients. I think just generally the upscaling seems to be a challenge at the moment. So these bioreactors need to be huge, and challenges in terms of having enough of that growth medium, and also microbiological issues that need to be avoided, need to be worked around. In terms of ingredient availability, if bovine serum is required, that will be a huge issue. So until there's an alternative available, I suppose that will be a limiting factor in terms of how much cultivated meat can be generated.
Yeah, it's quite
Phil, you might know more.
Well, it's quite challenging because we're not exactly sure how it's going to be done yet. So you can get cells, which are stem cells, which may differentiate, or you can get muscle cells or other cells to differentiate into different components depending on what you add. So you might be adding hormones or amino acids or growth factors. So you need to be able to source those. And importantly, you may need to have to remove those from the material before you actually sell it. If the meat's on some sort of scaffold, you might want to use proteases or lipases to break it away from the scaffolding. So they'll have to be sourced, but they also may be in the finished product. Or you may just scrape the cells off the surface of a reactor. So really, there's so many unknowns at the moment. People are just taking sort of step by step and sort of just trying to understand the risks as the processes develop.
Yeah.
And then a final question from Ben. So he said, "Hi Caroline, thanks very much. Will it be published?" So yes. Fazan's has just completed a lit review in this area ahead of our upcoming public consult with the first cell-based meat application. So I can connect you to afterwards.
Yes, that would be great.
Anything else that you know?
It has been published, so yeah. I'm not sure what the easiest way is for people to find it, but yeah, if you could put us in touch, that'd be great.
Yeah. So at the after this, this has been recorded, so it will be shared on our website, so we can include a little link.
Put a link in there.
Paper that I'm promising this all, but Michael's sitting in the background going, "What? No." But we can get this shared out with you. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't think we've got any more questions. Any last burdening things? Then do pop them in now. So otherwise, I'll give everybody back 20 minutes of their day. Thank you so much, Caroline and Phil, for sharing your time and sharing the details of your study, Caroline.
Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for sitting around for the Q&As as well. So yeah, this has been recorded. All our seminar sessions that we've done this year are already there. Just another reminder about our annual symposium meeting on the 3rd of July in Dunedin. We look forward to seeing you there. And Phil, I hope you've got some nice weather for us, so it's not too chilly and wet.
Well, it's glorious today.
Okay, we'll keep it like that. That will be fine. So yeah, in the meantime, thank you all for your attendance and have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Tēnā koutou katoa.